As we mentioned there, Ben, the world leaders gathering in Davos, the ski slopes there in Switzerland. It's the major economic forum. Is it a good look for the world's elite to be seen to be perhaps enjoying themselves there?
Many of the people, absolutely. I think, they've got to meet. They've got to meet somewhere, and very important discussions that are happening. I think, obviously, a broad range of views. But we've seen the OECD in the last few days saying that they don't think no deal is going to be as big an issue as it's perhaps made out. And Liam Fox, they're rightly saying we need to prepare for it. It needs to be on the table. It needs to be a real possibility. Otherwise, what incentive is there for the European Union to shift their position?
And we'll talk about that in more detail. Caroline, what do your constituents think, if they think at all, about Davos and leaders and the elite gathering?
Well, Davos to Doncaster, I don't think there's a direct
line
or route either way. I mean, just to say, I was out at the weekend knocking on doors, as I do many weekends over the year. And, I mean, Remain voters and Leave voters just looking in despair at Parliament and says, why aren't we just getting on with it? I think for most people, there's a sense that we should have it within our capacity to sort this out. I have to say, though, amongst a number of Leave voters, and I don't think this is just typical to Doncaster, there is a hardening view in favour of no deal. Now, I don't want us to crash out with no deal, but I think to solve that, we need to get a deal on the table we can agree with.
Right, we'll come on to that, as I say, in a moment. Neil, have you been to Davos?
I haven't, no. I've never been skiing either, but...
Would you like to go?
I'm not too sure. Maybe
for the forum rather than the skiing?
For the forum in the future, maybe. But look, it serves a purpose. It's a good opportunity to get together, discuss the big issues today, and ultimately the biggest issue facing the world at the moment is Brexit.
Right, we're relying on you, of course, Laura, from the FT, to stand up for Davos.
I mean, there's no harm in them going. Of course, it is an important annual event. The optics, though, obviously aren't great for the public, given the standstill and the chaos in Parliament. I think many would be questioning why ministers out there, why are they not in Parliament trying to sort this out as the clock is ticking.
Right, well, you two have already mentioned no deal. And Liam Fox, as we showed there, the International Trade Secretary, also said this morning that delaying Brexit was worse than a no-deal Brexit. Do you agree, Ben?
I do agree. I think kicking the can down the road further, we're already 2.5 years into this thing. The biggest challenge that I get from my local businesses, who are largely Leave backing, actually, is the uncertainty. And if we drag it out for longer, if we can't find a solution before the 29th of March, what chance of finding one after?
But why do you think it's worse? I mean, you could argue there's uncertainty on both sides in those scenarios, and there may be practical reasons for having to delay or extend Article 50.
Well, I think there are opportunities to have transition, and I think, as Caroline said, having that smooth transition into a new relationship is better. Well, we wouldn't, but all the more incentive to agree a deal. I do think, I absolutely agree with Caroline, that I sense the public's mood hardening. Obviously, we have to be more nuanced as politicians, but I get the very real feedback is Sodom, let's go.
But not with MPs. Their view, perhaps some would argue, many of them is hardening the other way. But we'll come on to what's going on in Parliament. But do you agree, broadly, then, with Liam Fox too, that actually delaying Brexit would be worse than no deal?
I think setting out like that isn't helpful. My problem with a number of the people who keep saying, both inside and outside Parliament, take no deal off the table, some of those people want us to stay in the European Union, and they are actively campaigning to that end. So maybe we should say, take no deal off the table, but take Remain off the table, so we can focus on what we need to do, which is get the headline divorce deal done so we can get into the more detailed work on the customs arrangements, single market, security and other things, which is what the transition period needs to happen. And the reason why we're having to do this, and I think this is important because it gets lost in all the chatter, the reason why we're having to do that detailed examination and transition is because the EU said that's how it had to be. Right. That's how they said it had to be, not that we could sort that out before we left.
And just briefly again, but is it worse to delay Brexit than to have a no deal? You said you don't want to crash out no deal.
I think the thing about this is this. Yvette Cooper's amendment is suggesting that we delay Article 50 to the 31st of December 2019. I think that is a disaster. I have to say, some of these people who are involved in process, I hear little about what deal they want. I just hear about them kicking the issue down the road.
From your perspective, Neil, you're worried about no deal, and we will be talking about the Irish response to that. But what would you like to happen at this point? Could you see Article 50 being delayed? And if it were to go to the EU 27, should Ireland say yes to that?
Well, the Irish government has already said that if the UK feels it needs more time, we will be the first within the EU to offer that, absolutely. In the same way, when we want to move on to the trade negotiations, we will absolutely be the UK's best friends because we want the closest, best possible trade and customs relationship between our two countries. However, what we really want now is we know what Westminster doesn't want, We need to know what Westminster does want, and we need to know what they want that is cognizant of what we on the European side can accept, that takes into account key issues, and key for us is the protection and the peace of our island, a very fragile peace that we saw over activities in Northern Ireland at the weekend for those who dismiss it, and that means that we do need a backstop and we do need a guarantee for the Good Friday Agreement.
So what would be your message to MPs like Caroline and Ben?
Well, we've
Not
spent
just
the last...
to us, I hope.
No, but you're the two here.
Yes, fair enough.
We've spent the last 18 months negotiating in good faith with the British government, making concessions on various issues in relation to customs and a transition period in the first place. We've agreed a withdrawal agreement that we feel is fair, that it gives us the least worst Brexit. Let's bring it back. Brexit wasn't our idea, and from the Irish people's point of view, we are totally opposed to Brexit. However, we accept that's the will of the British people, and we accept we've negotiated a deal. Let's move on to the transition period so we can make the backstop completely irrelevant in due course.
Ben?
Well, I think it's clear, actually, just watching the discussion that's happening in Parliament, pretty clear what Parliament wants and will accept. The main discussion around the withdrawal agreement, the bit that Parliament doesn't feel is fair, is the backstop.
And why haven't you said that to the European side?
Well, I think
we haven't had the discussion yet. Now, we have to be quite clear, and you talk about the backstop and you say we just take that off and make things so simple. The backstop, as is an insurance policy. I can't say this firmly enough. We never want to see the backstop come into place. It wouldn't be good for Ireland. It wouldn't be good for the European Union. However, in order to protect peace on our island, in order to make sure there isn't a hardening of border, there simply has to be a backstop, and that can't be changed.
I don't know what Theresa May has said or not said to the European Union.
She's leader of your party.
But, well, yeah, I'm not in those negotiations. But the reality is that one way or another, you're either talking about can we exit this with effectively no deal in 2 years, or if we can't do that, you're pushing it to we're going to exit this with no deal in 2 months.
Well, if you exit in 2 months, it's an absolute disaster for the British economy, and it's an absolute disaster for peace in our island.
And a disaster for the Irish economy,
Absolutely.
I put to you. So it isn't just, the onus isn't just on the UK government, is it? And actually, we had signs from the EU Commission about what would happen if we get to the 29th of March or very close to it and no deal has been agreed. Let's just listen to the EU Commission spokesperson from yesterday.
If you like me to push me and speculate on what might happen in a no-deal scenario in Ireland, I think it's pretty obvious. You will have a hard border.
That's what's going to happen. There's going to be a hard border, Neil.
We're on the path of something that's absolutely unprecedented. No member state has ever left the European Union. However, if we go down the hypothetical route, Ireland will, of course, have responsibilities to the single market and the European Commission, but the UK equally will have responsibilities to the WTO and implementing those rules. Both the Irish and British governments are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. They have to preserve that by guaranteeing no hardening of the border, and that means we need a deal. We need a managed Brexit.
But we have now got to a place where Margarita Schinas has said, look, let's be honest about this. There would have to be border checks. Do you accept that?
Well, let's be honest about it. Once we come to March 30th, and if the UK did make the disastrous decision to crash out, we would have to have some very, very difficult conversations with the European Commission. Equally, the British government would have to have very difficult conversations with the WTO.
But that difficult conversation has started. He sort of fired the starting gun. Will there be border checks? Is that what the EU is saying, that Ireland will have to put up border checks to protect the integrity of the single market?
But it's not just Ireland, and this is the whole thing. The responsibility is on both parties.
But in the
you
end,
can't
the
just throw
border
everything
is
on Ireland.
with your country and Northern Ireland.
No, Northern Ireland, according to the Good Friday Agreement, is the United Kingdom. So the borders between the European Union and the UK.
You are one side of it.
And the British government and the Irish government both have a responsibility. It's not just Ireland here.
Look, the answer to this is to focus on sorting out the headline arrangements around how we're going to leave the European Union, get the divorce deal done so we can get into the transition period and work through. The truth is, if we can get the headline deal done, nothing will change after the 29th of March. And I think this is a difficult place for Theresa May in terms of the customs union, a customs arrangement. But the truth is she will never satisfy the hardline Brexiteers on her side. And that's why she has to reach out to people like myself and other Labour politicians who do genuinely respect the outcome of the referendum and want to get a deal and move forward to make sure all our interests, Irish, EU, UK, are protected.
Isn't that the truth, Ben?
I don't think that is true. I think if she can, and I do sense a softening in the discussions in terms of alternatives to a backstop arrangement over the last day or two. But if she can deliver that, then I think she'll get a majority for it in the Commons.
Right, and you'll support it.
I will.
Right, and the softening being what exactly in your mind?
We need a way to exit it in the future, and I personally don't see what the difference is between us exiting a backstop 2 years down the line and us leaving with no deal in March this year. It's the same choice.
Because the whole point is you can't just have a unilateral exit from something. The whole point is that it's agreed by the UK and the EU as a whole in order to maintain the peace.
If we're in a position where we can't leave that without the EU's permission, that's not leaving. You listen to the German Foreign Minister,
you listen to Jean-Claude Juncker, you listen to my Taoiseach and my Taoiseach. It's absolutely certain. We've a very simple withdrawal agreement on the table, covers 3 key areas. Let's get that agreed and move on to the difficult trade negotiations.
But you must accept as well, the absence of the Northern Ireland Assembly does not help.
No,
the process
absolutely.
either. We haven't had that for 2 years. So in the big scheme of things, the fact that that's not functioning isn't good for peace in Northern Ireland.
And to the credit,
either.
our Taoiseach Simon Coveney and Karen Bradley have been working with those parties to get it up. We didn't collapse the Assembly.
I'm not accusing you of that.
I wish they were there, to be honest.
Neil, isn't the solution, though, to this dilemma, in part, if not wholly, for the Irish government to give ground on the backstop? You will have watched, obviously, everything unfold in Parliament.
Why has this always come onto the Irish government?
No, I'm just asking. I said in part, and you are representing
a co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement.
But wouldn't that be a solution? You may not like it, but it would solve it, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily. It might solve Ben's concerns, it might solve some concerns of the arch-Brexiteers and the DUP, but ultimately it'll put the Good Friday Agreement in jeopardy. And we have a legal responsibility, as does the British government. Ultimately, Brexit wasn't our decision. The British government have the whole responsibility to find a way out of it that they find acceptable, cognizant of what we can accept.
Is there softening? I mean, there are reports in the papers, I'll put it no further than that, but softening on the side of the EU where diplomats are saying we're ready to take the initiative from Ireland in terms of finding an alternative to the backstop. Is that happening behind the scenes?
No. For the past 5 weeks, we've seen reports in various newspapers in the UK with unnamed sources, European officials, German officials, French officials saying that, oh, we'll soften the backstop. But ultimately, what do we see? We see Angela Merkel, we see her Foreign Minister, we see Emmanuel Macron, all the people who are elected and speaking publicly saying, we are lock stock, the backstop has to be part of the withdrawal agreement. It's that simple.
And you trust them 110% to hold that and
Absolutely.
not soften in order to get a deal through?
Absolutely. This goes so much more beyond. This is about the future of the European Union as a whole. It is so much more important than the whims of backbenchers in Westminster.
Laura, where is this going to go? Because if, you take everybody at their word, there isn't going to be a hard border put up. So it won't happen, will it, even in the event of no deal?
This is why this is so fundamental. I can totally understand why no one wants to talk about any kind of conversation that is happening between Ireland and the UK, because you're right, they're co-guarantors. This is not just on Ireland. This is the UK's responsibility as well, as to what would be put in place in the event of no deal. Because if you start talking about what would be put in place in the event of no deal to prevent a hard border, Eurosceptics will then argue, well, then you don't need a backstop. If you guys can find a solution to avoid that, why are we talking about backstops?
Absolutely.
That's the crux of it. That's why we're not hearing these conversations. I don't know if they're privately going on, but someone must be thinking about what to do.
So let's shift on it now, agree to leave with a deal and spend the next 18 months transition working that out.
But then why should the EU move? Why should Ireland move when they are watching Parliament, who can't agree on who to walk through the lobbies with, never mind a big issue like leaving the EU? If you can't decide and show a majority in any way, why should anyone else do your work?
I think we can, and I think this is what the Prime Minister is going to attempt to do over the next week or so. I do feel, and having spoken to colleagues in the DUP and Brexiteer colleagues, that if she gets that movement on the backstop, she will get a majority.
But the truth is the Prime Minister has thought for a long time now that she could just get this through just with her own side in the DUP. And it's become clear that that's not the case. The majority that she lost by on the vote a few weeks ago is a mishmash of different groups with different agendas and different motivations. The fact is, to get a reasonable deal, which is what I've always wanted on this, is she's going to have to reach out. I'm pleased she's meeting with trade union leaders. I'm pleased she's addressing some of the concerns around environmental protections and employment rights.
You think it's genuine?
I do think it's genuine, but we have to have the proof, and that has to be legally binding to protect those standards going forward.
There are other moves, of course, going on your side of
Many,
the
I'm
House.
sure.
But the one that there is particular focus on is your colleague Yvette Cooper. And this would be an amendment that would be laid down to the government's motion that would, in effect, give MPs the chance to put down a bill or legislation to delay and extend Article 50. Laura, fill us in on that and other amendments that might make it next Tuesday.
I think this is the one to watch. This is the one that's legally binding and seems to have a lot of cross-party support. It's been tabled by Nick Bowles, former Tory minister, and obviously Yvette Cooper, so it's got that cross-party appeal. And what it would mean is MPs, if a deal wasn't pulled out of the hat by the end of February, MPs would then get a vote to extend Article 50 potentially to the end of December. What is not clear is what happens after that. And that's, again, a fundamental point. If we're going to extend Article 50, why? Why are we extending Article 50? What does the government say to the EU? Sorry, we're going to have to sort this out, so we need to extend it because we're going to do this. Could you then see Dominic Grieve's amendment come in and work in conjunction with Yvette Cooper's? He's calling for indicative voting so that the Commons can work out what there is majority support for.
Can I just clear up this amendment by Yvette Cooper? It would be an amendment to a motion next Tuesday, the government's motion. It wouldn't be binding at that point, would it?
No, this is the
But anyway,
what they would have to do is basically allow for us to actually pass in a day, they're talking
That's
about
right.
a legislation.
On February the
and the
5th.
problem is it doesn't resolve anything. It just kicks the can down the road.
Well, let's have a listen to the Shadow Chancellor, your colleague, John McDonnell, on this issue.
Yvette Cooper's put an amendment down, which I think is sensible. It says to the government, you've run down the clock so much. It looks as though if you can't get a deal by February 26th, she said, we'll then have to look. The government will then have to bring forward proposals to extend that. So I think it's increasingly likely already that we'll have to take that option because the government's run the clock down.
Well, it sounds like Labour's going to back that amendment, which means it could well pass. Do you support it?
Well, I'm very concerned about it, and at the moment I'm not inclined to support it. And the reason is this. I just feel that a lot of these process motions are avoiding actually discussing the big issues. And actually we should have 100% of our energy focused on getting a reasonable deal, lobbying the government on that side of things. As John said, it pushes it back to at least the end of this year. European elections will happen during that time. The Parliament will stand down. New commissioners will have to be brought in. That won't happen until the autumn. This is not taking us any further forward. And to be honest, it's another processy, mechanical device.
Yeah, but it's a process. It's a process mechanism that could radically change the direction of what happens to Brexit.
But the problem is here, Joe, is that what is happening is the People's Vote campaign and delays at Article 50. Many of the people out there are seeing that as stop Brexit tactics. And where does it take us at the end of the year? Do I really believe if we have another week, another 2 weeks, another 3 months, that some of the people in the House of Commons are going to be satisfied? Many of the people supporting Grieve and Cooper don't want to leave the European Union. That's their view, and they're using Parliament to frustrate the process.
So you're not going to back it even if Labour whip this operation? In other words, they say to all their MPs that you need to back...
Well, I've said I'm very concerned about this at the moment. I'm not inclined to vote for it. So, as with anything, I'm open to persuasion, but I do not believe these sort of bureaucratic processes. I'd love to hear the proposers of these amendments actually talk a bit more about what sort of deal they want and work with others to secure that deal. I never hear that.
Ben, on the basis that it could pass, particularly highly likely if Labour do swing behind it, because it will only take 15 or so of your colleagues, I don't know the exact figures, on the Conservative side to back it, and then it does pass and it changes the game. Have you missed your best shot at getting Brexit?
No, I think in the context of Brexit, party whipping has less impact perhaps than it does in other areas. I don't think that just because John McDonnell says they all need to do it, that there will be Brexiteer Labour colleagues who will all swing behind that.
So you're crossing your fingers?
Well, I just don't think it's going to happen.
There are MPs who campaign for Remain but respect the outcome of the referendum but feel we need to get on with it.
It's absolutely right.
Difference.
There's no point kicking the can down the road to December if there isn't a solution. If it is the case that there is nothing without movement on the backstop that both gets a majority and meets the criteria for us.
There is a deal, Ben. So why it's coming to crunch time on the Irish border. It's also coming to crunch time for you in this game of chicken that everybody seems to be playing. There is a deal. There is a deal on the table. Is that your best shot at Brexit?
I believe that if there is some movement in a direction that means we are not tied into this thing potentially permanently, which would not be Brexit in my opinion.
Why don't you want to be tied into peace permanently?
I don't want to be tied into the European Union permanently because people voted to leave.
You'd be guaranteeing peace on my island permanently, but in a system with an insurance policy that no one ever wants to see come into place.
Well, one way or another, whether it's at the end of a backstop or it's at the end of March, Britain has to leave the European Union.
We can negotiate.
And we can either spend 18 months sorting out the Northern Irish border or we can do it in 2 months' time.
Right, and you're still worried about the UK being held in a customs union permanently with the EU?
Yes, that was in our manifesto. We do not want to be in a customs union. And if the only deal on the table is one that either moves on the backstop or there isn't a deal that will get through Parliament otherwise.
Just before I move on, Caroline, also in that interview, John McDonnell talked about a second referendum. Labour seems to be inching closer to the idea of supporting. It's not there yet. But he did say if there were to be another referendum on leaving the EU, then the status quo, i.e. Remain, would need to be on the ballot paper. Do you agree?
Well, I don't support a second referendum, full stop.
So you don't?
So I'm not really interested about a ballot paper that I hope will never materialise.
Do you think Labour is going to go for it in the end?
No.
You don't?
Because I think there is... Look, going back to the point about whipping, this issue, as in the previous administrations, has divided. I think actually on some of these things we should have a free vote, because there is very different views on the Labour side. Many colleagues, a number of frontbenchers in the shadow teams have said this week they will not support a second referendum. I'm very clear. I went into the general election 2017 saying I wouldn't, and I keep to my promise.
Right. Would it be, in your mind, responsible, though, to answer the demands of many members and voters, and it is part of a phased process, of course, to use that word of the Labour Party, to back a second referendum if it can't be resolved?
No, I think I look at the referendum in 2016, the general election in 2017. I listen to my constituents. I think this is about faith in politics and trust in politics. I campaigned for Remain very hard in my constituency that overwhelmingly voted Leave. I face that on a day-to-day basis. I continue to engage with Leave voters who want to leave without a deal and say that is not the way forward. So I face that every single day as well. We need to find a way through this. Asserts the fact that we are leaving the European Union but can have a good, strong relationship with Ireland and other colleagues across the EU.
All right, let's have a look at something else related to Brexit, and I'll show you the front pages of the Daily Mail and the Financial Times. Betrayal of Brexit backer Dyson. This is James Dyson as he moves headquarters to Singapore. An outspoken Brexit backer, Dyson shifts company headquarters to Singapore. Same sort of headline. Is it a betrayal for James Dyson to quit the UK as it's being reported?
I don't think so. He's not moving the jobs over there. He's still employing people in the UK. He still invests in engineering and training in the UK. It's his headquarters moving over there. Or he says, you know, business reasons, a better business environment for him in the long term. And that ultimately comes down to this uncertainty, in my view. We need to get an answer to this and make sure that business feels comfortable investing in the UK.
Laura?
Again, really bad optics for such a vocal
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
to be upping. And, you know,
You do agree it's bad optics?
I go, definitely bad optics, yeah.
For now, they're only moving 2 senior managers over there. But now, why would you do that? I think there'll be some digging today into what tax perks might be
If
available.
we leave the European Union, we have more ability to be flexible and attract businesses like that.
Which is
to
what
come
he
back
was
here.
saying, so
Absolutely.
that's why it's not
Absolutely.
ideal.
You must be disappointed.
Definitely. And it's a shame that I think the uncertainty has led him to feel he can't confidently
Well,
stay
I mean, I think in some respects what he's doing is symptomatic about what a lot of business is doing. I think the EU did a report in 2017 which illustrated that a huge amount of investment from the UK, from companies, basically a lot of financial companies, goes into the EU, and the primary motivation is for lower tax rates.
Right. It's not just Dyson, though, is it, Laura, who've indicated they're going to be moving parts of their operations elsewhere?
It was Sony this morning have suggested that they might also be following TAG, which, again, given the backdrop of what's going on in Parliament, the public will be looking at this thinking, if you don't sort this out, people are going to be leaving the UK. What's going to happen to our jobs in the long term? Whatever companies are saying now about continuing to pay tax here and employing people here, if you're moving your operations abroad, there is a chance you're going to start hiring people in those countries.
And this is despite Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, being reported as telling businesses, don't worry, no deal's not going to happen.
Yeah, Philip Hammond's really helpful, isn't he, on all these matters?
And he's right to say that. He's right to say that we shouldn't want to.
Well, it shouldn't happen, absolutely, and that's why it's so important with to have that certainty. That's why the European Union needs to recognise that the only way this deal is going to happen is if
to
they
make
move.
those decisions. We've seen in Ireland, Barclays is now our largest bank. We've seen 800 jobs come over from JP Morgan, from London, HSBC. Various companies have come
As a result of Brexit?
As a result of Brexit, and they're quite bolshy
Which
about
hasn't
saying
happened,
this,
of course.
And it's nothing to do with taxation policy. It's saying, and you made a very interesting comment, when we leave the EU, we'll be free. When you leave the EU, if you leave in a no-deal scenario, you leave your biggest market. You leave the world's largest trading bloc. You leave the key to 61% of UK exports.
The idea
Financial
that they
services
wouldn't
are
want to
coming to Dublin
negotiate a
because they
trade
want to maintain
arrangement
in that single market
ridiculous.
the largest
Well,
economic deal.
Well, we haven't
no
done the
deal would be
withdrawal
such a
agreement yet
disaster.
before we even get to the trade deal. We're going to move on. I want